Welcome to video 2, where we will outline all the 11 Incoterms. Incoterms are divided into two main categories or groups. There are 7 rules for any modes of transport and 4 rules for sea and inland waterway transport, giving a total of 11 rules. The Incoterms rules for any modes of transport include EXW or Ex Works name place of delivery, FCA free carrier name place of delivery, CPT carriage paid to name place of destination, CIP carriage and insurance paid to name place of destination in buyer's country, DAP delivered at place named place of destination, DPU delivered at place unloaded, and DDP delivered duty paid named place of destination. The Incoterms rules for sea and inland waterway transport are FAS free alongside ship named loading port, FOB free on board named loading port, CFR cost and freight named destination port, and CIF cost, insurance, and freight named destination port. Another useful way of classifying the rules is by considering who is responsible for the main carriage. Is it the buyer or seller? If it is the seller, then where does the risk pass? Is it before the main carriage or after it? So this gives us 4 groups. The E group, where buyer is responsible for all carriage. The F group, where the buyer arranges the main carriage. The D group, where the seller arranges main carriage and the risk passes after the main carriage. And the C group, where the seller arranges the main carriage, but risk passes during or before the main carriage. That means when the goods are handed over to the transport company or shipping line or airline. This diagram of Incoterms at a glance may be helpful as we examine the 11 Incoterms. Let's start with rules for any modes of transport. Ex Works name place of delivery. It is often used when making an initial quotation for the sale of goods without any transport or delivery costs included. Ex work means that the seller makes the goods available at the premise or at a named place of works, which could be a factory or warehouse, etc. The seller does not need to load the goods on any collecting vehicle, nor does he need to clear the goods for export. It is the buyer's duty to do so, or responsibility and risk to do so. FCA free carrier name place of delivery. The seller hands the goods cleared for export into the disposal or custody of the carrier, the first carrier that could be nominated by the buyer. It may be a truck or a ship or a plane at a named place, so the risk passes when goods are handed over to the first carrier. CPT or carriage paid to, name place of destination. Under CPT, the seller pays for the carriage of goods up to the named place of destination. Risk transfers to the buyer when handling the goods over to that first carrier. CIP, carriage and insurance paid to named place of destination, is similar to CPT, with the exception that the seller is required to obtain at least the all-risk ICC-A coverage for insurance of the goods. So in this case, the risk will pass also when the goods are handed over to the first carrier. DAP, delivered at place named place of destination. The seller is deemed to have delivered when the goods are placed at the disposal of the buyer on the arriving means of transport and are ready for unloading at the named place of destination, usually a terminal at the port of discharge. So under DAP terms, the seller needs to manage all the risks involved in bringing the goods up to that named place, which could be the terminal at the buyer's country. However, import clearance will be the cost of the buyer in this case. DPU, delivered at place unloaded, named place of destination, is quite similar to DAP, except that the seller also needs to pay for unloading the goods at the named place. So the seller pays for the carriage until he has unloaded the goods. So If the nameplate is at the port or quay or terminal, then the buyer will be responsible to handle the import clearance and the delivery until the buyer's own warehouse. So the risks are transferred only after the goods have been unloaded at the terminal or wharf. DDP, Delivered Duty Paid Nameplace of Destination. The seller is responsible for delivering the goods to the nameplace in the country of the buyer. Usually it's up to the door or to the distribution center of the buyer. So he has to pay for all the import clearance, including any duties and taxes that may incur. The seller is not responsible for unloading the goods at the distribution center of the buyer, however. So if the buyer requires the seller to also cover that, that should also be discussed and negotiated and indicated clearly. So this term places the maximum obligations on the seller. Let's now examine the rules for sea and waterway transport. FAS, free alongside ship name port of loading, implies that the seller delivers when the goods are placed alongside the vessel. The vessel could be at a terminal or quay, that's QUAY, or the terminal of the barge or jetty, nominated by the buyer at the name port of loading. The risk of loss or damage to the goods passes when the goods are alongside the ship, and the buyer takes responsibility for all the costs from that moment onwards. It is typically used for heavy lift and bulk cargo, so it is not appropriate for containerized shipments. FOB, or free on board, implies that the seller delivers the goods on board the vessel nominated by the buyer at the name port of shipment. The risk of loss or damage to the goods passes when the goods are on board the vessel. So the buyer takes responsibility for all costs from that moment onwards. The seller must clear the goods for export because he has to go through the customs clearance in order to bring the cargo to the ship side. CFR, cost and freight named destination port, implies that the seller delivers when the goods are on board the vessel. The risk of loss or damage to the goods passes when the goods are on board. The seller must contract and pay the cost and freight necessary to bring the goods to the name port of destination. So the risk is transferred once the goods are loaded. CIF, cost, insurance and freight name destination port. It's the same as CFR with the addition that the seller must also obtain at least the minimum insurance cover against the buyer's risk of loss of or damage to the goods during the carriage. In this case, the minimum insurance cover is that of ICC Clause C. ICC stands for Institute Cargo Clause C. Congratulations for having come so far. You made it, all the 11 Incoterms. As mentioned, you may find this visual chart of all the Incoterms helpful. We have come to the end of this video. In the next video, we will learn how Incoterms affect the selling price of the exporter's goods.